As a storm rips my life apart, can I expose Mr. Thompson's twisted web of lies before it's too late? The air was thick with humidity that evening, the clouds looming deeply overhead as I faced Mr. Thompson, our real estate broker. He leaned against the white picket fence of our new home, wearing a grin that felt like a warning bell. I could still hear his smug chuckle echoing in my ears when he congratulated us on what he called the best decision we could make by choosing his recommended homeowners insurance. "Trust me, I know the best policy," he had assured me, his dark eyes glittering with a disregard that now made my skin crawl. In that moment, I had felt a rush of elation at finally stepping onto the property ladder. I was naive, unaware of the storm clouds not just above, but in the interaction before me, full of deception. Fast forward 6 months later, and a sudden call warning me about an incoming storm sent a shiver down my spine. It was strange, almost ironic that storm warnings had become a harbinger of anxiety for me, severing the delicate threads of comfort I had hoped to weave into our lives. I dismissed the creeping dread and focused instead on the mundane tasks that lined my Saturday afternoon. But as the sky turned from gray to an ominous shade of black, a loud crash echoed outside, rattling my nerves. Little did I know, the heavy winds that tore through my backyard would not only unveil the raw power of nature, but also the betrayal of a man I had trusted blindly. As the first heavy raindrops turned into a torrential downpour, I watched in horror from the window as the wild winds waged war against my home. My heart raced as I imagined the fragile state of our new roof, the very roof that I had been assured was invulnerable. Just when I thought it couldn't get worse, the sound of splintering wood filled the air, followed by the sickening crack of a mighty oak colliding with our property. I felt a cold sweat on my brow as darkness crept into my mind, a foreboding thought edging closer. What if Mr. Thompson's policy didn't cover damage in such dire circumstances? I rushed to the living room, my mind racing as I grabbed the flimsy folder that contained the documents Mr. Thompson had handed over with unwavering confidence. In my anxious search, I couldn't shake the feeling that my instincts had been subdued, overshadowed by that ingrained trust he had manipulated. I flipped open the folder to find the papers bearing Mr. Thompson's signature. Scanning the contents, pieces of information unfurled, like a macabre puzzle. To my horror, the policy details were vague, riddled with terms that seemed intentionally evasive. The sinking feeling in my gut screamed that something was off, yet I forced the thoughts aside and looked out the window again. As the winds raged outside, I begged the universe that the insurance policy would cover the damages. Would it be enough? Would I even be able to file a claim? Just when I thought my prayers had been heard, a deafening crash rang through the house, sending my heart plummeting. I stared at the shady insurance documents, burgeoning waves of panic crashing over me, as I realized I might not just be dealing with physical damage. I'd be facing an insurmountable financial burden as well. A certainty coiled around me. There was no safety net, and with each passing moment that reality sank deeper. When the storm finally settled, I stepped out into the chaos that had so quickly become my backyard. Branches lay strewn across the ground like shattered dreams, and I felt a rush of despair wash over me. Suddenly, I was reminded not just of the devastation outside, but of the accumulating fears swirling within me. I struggled to comprehend the horror. The truth was unraveling around me like a tightly woven ball of yarn, descending into a tangle I couldn't untie. Later that week, standing amidst the wreckage, I reached for my phone, desperate to call Mr. Thompson. Panic mingled with anger and clarity. I would confront him, seek answers for the betrayal. I dialed his number, only to be met with an empty ring. With every unanswered call, the burden grew heavier, until it felt like a weight I would never shake off. The more I searched for Mr. Thompson, the more it dawned on me he had vanished, perhaps back into the shadows where deceit and manipulation reside. Only the chilling echoes of his voice remained, now interlaced with lies and false promises. The next few days turned into a blur of phone calls to insurance companies that claimed they had no record of my policy. Repair estimates began to roll in, each one a cruel reminder of the loss we had just begun to confront. I was betrayed, ensnared in a web of lies spun by a man who had slipped through my fingers like sand. I felt my world crumbling around me, swirling in chaos with no sign of recovery in sight. Yet buried beneath the layers of despair was a flicker of determination. I would not let Mr. Thompson get away with this. I owed it to myself, to my family, to unravel the truth behind the wreckage. With a fierce resolve igniting a fire in my belly, I would embark on a desperate hunt to uncover what really happened and recoup our losses. Time passed, but I couldn't shake the burning question. How many others had he duped? And would I find him before it was too late? Little did I know, the path ahead would lead me into a labyrinth of deceit far more complex than I had anticipated, where more than just my home would be at stake. Days after the storm, I walked through the wreckage of my home, a chilling twilight settling around me as the sun dipped below the horizon. The vibrant decorations we had painstakingly chosen for our new beginning lay strewn about like forgotten dreams, soaking in the remnants of chaos and despair. Fragments of our life were scattered, the whimsical gnome I had painted for the garden now a broken shell. its smile erased by shards of wood and debris. I stood in the middle of our living room, stunned by the profound shift from hope to heartbreak, my heart pounding with knots of dread. In that fraught silence, an urgent thought pierced through. I had to call the insurance office and file a claim, even if I half expected to hear the worst. As I picked up my phone, trembling with a mixture of hope and anxiety, the world outside felt eerily still. I dialed the number, fueled by the flickering flame of expectation. "This has to work," I whispered to myself, each ring amplifying my desperation. When a calm agent finally answered, a chill swept through me. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but there's no record of you listed under any active policy." Time froze for a heartbeat, my breath hitching in disbelief, the weight of their words crashing down around me. I had been standing in darkness, but now a deafening realization blared over the storm. Mr. Thompson had sold me a forged document, a lifeline that was nothing more than a cruel illusion. Panic surged as I clutched the fraudulent paperwork that Mr. Thompson had provided like a lifeline. My blood ran cold, and the very air around me felt heavy with betrayal. Could this really be happening? I threw myself into the car, my hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel, the engine sputtering to life like my own frayed nerves. I sped toward Thompson's office, desperate for answers, the road merging into a blur of angry thoughts and curses directed at the man who had orchestrated this betrayal. My mind spun with question show, could I have been so naive? What had I missed? With each passing block, my heart raced faster, straining under the weight of anger and fear. When I arrived, the reality hit me like a slap in the face. The parking lot lay empty, an eerie silence rippling through the air around me. I stumbled out and nudged open the door to his office, finding it lacking the vibrant life I had associated with it a mere few months ago. The furniture stood awkwardly untouched, but the fresh scent of wood was replaced by dust, each empty cubicle a ghostly reminder of the deceit that had unfolded. Confusion morphed into dread, and I felt the walls closing in as I meandered through the dark space, valuing the lurking presence of Mr. Thompson only to find traces of his absence. As the weight of my despair enveloped me, I caught sight of a hastily scrawled note on the desk. He had vanished, leaving no forwarding address and no clues. I scoured every inch of the place, unable to accept my growing terror. Could he really have disappeared without a trace? My pulse thudded in my ears as I stumbled backward out of the office, the predatory weight of reality pulling me down. I fell to my knees in the parking lot, the bitterness of betrayal coating my tongue as I replayed every moment of trust I had placed in him. My heart raced when I realized the enormity of my mistake. The man who had promised security had not only pocketed our premiums, but also left us vulnerable in our greatest hour of need. Panic clawed at my throat and tears brimmed in my eyes, blurring the edges of my reality. Despair shifted into a fierce determination as I picked myself up from the pavement, wiping a tear from my cheek, anger igniting a fire within me. I couldn't let this go. I had to fight back against the shadows that threatened to swallow me whole. This wasn't just about the damage to my home, it was a matter of principle. I clenched my fists, swearing to the empty parking lot that I would uncover the man who had cheated us so mercilessly. Gripping my phone, I dialed my neighbors. Perhaps someone else had felt Thompson's icy grasp and could provide a lifeline in this hurricane of despair. As I drove back home in the fading twilight, gathering my thoughts, I found that I wasn't alone. Whispers of Mr. Thompson's deceit trickled from neighbors. Stories of trust betrayed washed over me like stormy waves threatening to overturn my vessel. That night, I lay wide awake, the stars flickering dimly through my shattered vision as I envisioned the possibilities. I would gather evidence. I would reach out to others he deceived, and I would find a way to recover every penny he had stolen from us. However, lurking in the back of my mind was the chilling thought, would I succeed in my mission, or would Mr. Thompson slip away like a dream half remembered, leaving nothing but ashes of my resolved fury? The task ahead was daunting. I had to scrabble together the pieces, investigate further into Mr. Thompson's past dealings, and uncover the truth behind the charade. I felt the stirring in my chest as determination swelled, a call to action that spoke louder than the despair that surrounded me. There was much I didn't know, but everything was at stake. My heart beat with purpose as I prepared to confront a world riddled with deception. The path ahead would be fraught with challenges, but I was ready to face them. After all, I wasn't just fighting for my home, I was fighting for my very sense of justice, an elemental force that could no longer be ignored. Determined to find answers, I began reaching out to neighbors who had used Mr. Thompson in their own home-buying journeys. The initial calls echoed with promises of camaraderie, but soon enough, the reality of their experiences trickled in like a slow leak. Each conversation ended abruptly, usually with the same disheartening resonance. Mr. Thompson had vanished from their lives like a mirage, leaving them clutching at the remnants of his name. The added burden of my own loss felt like a chain tightening around my chest as I hung up phone call after phone call, growing more desperate as I realized the depths of Thompson's deceit. Was I truly the only one left to carry this burden of betrayal? One late afternoon, I finally connected with someone who had dealt with him before, a frail old man named Mr. Jenkins. whose voice creaked like the ancient porch steps he invited me to sit on. The faint sunlight kissed our faces, casting long shadows over the wooden boards as he told me about Thompson's elaborate schemes with a tremor of anxiety in his voice. He spoke of shady dealings, fraudulent insurance policies, and families left mourning the security Thompson promised them, but never delivered. Just like that, a heavy weight descended upon my shoulders. This man had swindled numerous families, disappearing right after pocketing their hard-earned premiums. My heart raced and I could feel the walls of my reality closing in. Jenkins leaned closer, his voice lowering conspiratorially. It's always the same story, dear. He charms you with false information, then kicks the dust in your face as he makes off with your money. I once had a neighbor who lost her home altogether because of his lies. You should be careful, they might track you down too. The snippets of Thompson's past were a dagger digging deeper into my flesh. Would anyone be able to help me find peace after this disaster? I couldn't help but wonder about my own future. Was I going to be just another victim in Thompson's wake? As I prepared to thank Mr. Jenkins and head home, dread crashed down anew when my phone rang, displaying an unfamiliar number. I hesitated before answering, instinctively knowing this call would activate yet another layer of dread in my spiraling life. The voice on the other end belonged to a representative of my mortgage lender, and their tone held a chilling inflection that froze my nerves. Surgery smooth? They informed me calmly that they were initiating foreclosure proceedings since I had missed 3 payments. My heart seized, the air around me becoming thick and suffocating. All those months of anticipation and hope when we bought our home reduced to this heartbreaking revelation. I gripped the phone tighter, barely able to process what was happening. How could I be missing payments when I was in a fight to repair my home? My thoughts stumbled over each other, racing like an out-of-control train. I had banked everything we owned into rebuilding a new roof, structural repairs, the things I had written down meticulously on the makeshift spreadsheets littering my dining room table. The extent of this burden was enormous, and I felt my dreams swallowed whole, churning beneath the weight of anger and despair, as I realized I was quickly losing everything I had worked so hard to achieve. How could the world be so cruel? My knees buckled beneath me as I leaned against the wall, tears spilling from my eyes uncontrollably as I mulled over the avalanche of relentless pressure. The stark reality of my situation sank its claws deeper into my being. I was losing a home I adored and worked tirelessly to possess, one that now felt more like a prison than a sanctuary. With each sob that racked my frame, I vowed to uphold the flicker of resolve in the pit of my stomach. I had to fight back. I had to do something before it was too late. What was left of my resolve lifted me as I decided I wouldn't let my dreams be crushed without a fight. So, I wiped the tears from my cheeks and pushed myself off the wall, feeling solid ground beneath my feet. My mind ticked over, and I knew I needed to gather evidence about Mr. Thompson's treachery. Not just for myself, but for the countless families he had wronged. I set out with determination, ready to scour the depths of the internet, local records, and beyond, to piece together exactly what had happened. No stone would go unturned in my pursuit of justice. I could hardly breathe for the resolve that surged within me, surged like a wave, as I envisioned a crescendo of power and strength building behind me. Every phone call, every email, every moment spent investigating felt like I was drawing closer to my purpose. My heart raced with fervor as I carved my path through the shadows left by Mr. Thompson. As I turned the doorknob to leave, I could almost feel him, a specter of deceit looming at the edge of my life. But this time, I was ready to confront the darkness and unveil the truths hidden beneath layers of lies. The world was vast, and I had allies waiting to surface: neighbors, friends, anyone who had once shaken hands with Mr. Thompson and buckled under the weight of his phony promises. Would they stand beside me as I called upon the injustice drilled deep into my soul? Would they join me in this fight? Or was I destined to confront it all alone? The faint light of dusk was fading as I sat at my cramped kitchen table, dissecting law articles like they were ancient scrolls. My heart raced again and again as I imagined each possibility. I had grown desperate over the weeks of researching attorneys scrawling the names of lawyers who specialized in fraud on crumpled notes that clung to my skin like barnacles. Fear spiraled in me like a permanent echo. No one else had dared to touch this case or speak the name of Mr. Thompson, our treacherous former broker, but I pushed through the dread and sought a fortitude I thought I'd lost. Finally, after an endless barrage of phone calls, I secured an interview with Christine, a fiery attorney renowned for her relentless pursuit of justice in cases like mine. Her name had rippled through the forums as the kind of righteous warrior I needed right now. As I sat across from her, her intense gaze seemed to spark the fire inside of me, reigniting the courage I'd thought had long since been extinguished. "We can do this. We can file a lawsuit against him for what he did to you," Christine stated firmly. Just as I began to see the faint glow of hope on the horizon, a knock shattered the moment, reverberating through the unease of my home. I opened the door to reveal a well-dressed investigator, his demeanor unreadable yet laced with tension. He introduced himself with such little preamble, it set my heart racing again, like a sledgehammer against my chest. His nameplate read, Mr. Edwards, and with it, my pulse quickened. He didn't waste time with niceties. He came bearing disturbing news, Allegations that twisted my stomach into knots. My mind raced to grasp the implications, but it felt like trying to catch smoke with bare hands. "I'm here on behalf of your mortgage company," he stated coolly, and the horror of his words danced in the air. "We have concerns regarding the words that followed sliced into me like glass. Mismanagement, suspicious activities, and an emotional tempest brewed in my chest, begging me to scream out in denial. Accusations clouded the air, like a storm ready to crash down. "Are you suggesting I'm involved in some kind of fraud?" I nearly whispered, the question sinking into the silence between us, like a dark weight. He tapped his pen against his notepad and nodded slightly, a chilling affirmation that echoed louder than I'd imagined possible. The layers of deception were peeling back so cruelly that I felt as if I was trapped in a nightmare that I couldn't wake from. As if he could sense my impending collapse, Mr. Edwards deftly handed me a document that seemed hot to the touch. "These allegations against your character are concerning, especially following the disaster with Mr. Thompson. We have a serious situation on our hands." Each word dripped with implications, a web of deceit that threatened to ensnare me completely. The towering weight of it all bore down, flicking my past hopes away like crumbs scattered to the wind. All at once, my frustration collided with the injustice of my circumstances, igniting a primal urge to fight back. I couldn't allow myself to be painted with the same brush as Mr. Thompson, the man who had pummeled my life into utter chaos while vanishing without a trace. In that moment of sheer desperation, resolve bloomed within me again, but it was different this time. I wouldn't just sulk in despair, I would dig deeper, summon every ounce of strength within me, and uncover the truth. It was too late to retreat now. With Christine armed beside me, I felt a surge of fortitude swell within, a call to action fueling my steps. Suddenly, I was a vessel of fiery determination, daring to unveil not just Thompson's lies, but the dark histories of those who could be complicit in this rot. I may have been painted as a villain in their sketches, but I would paint my own picture of justice, vibrant and unyielding. As the shadows crept deeper into the folds of the evening, lingering doubts reminded me that the storm was far from over. Yet once more, I clung to the hope that with every ounce of knowledge I gleaned, and every righteous purpose burning within me, I could rise from the ashes of disillusionment. Still, as my mind raced into the cold night, I couldn't shake the dark thoughts that swarmed around me, wondering if the web would tighten around my fragile resolve or if I could truly escape the suffocation of false allegations. Would I discover the hidden threads that connected Mr. Thompson to the allegations before it was too late? Or would I end up as just another pawn in someone else's sinister game? The stakes had never felt higher. As the weeks wore on, I became a pariah in my community. The morning light filtering through my kitchen window felt more like a spotlight shining down on my deepest shame, illuminating the whispers that had started to slither through the neighborhood. Friends I once counted on turned away, their eyes narrowing as they averted their gaze, each empty expression reinforcing the feeling of isolation that clung to me like a second skin. It was incredulous how quickly judgment spread, the kind of judgment that stems not from understanding, but from a vile cocktail of fear and scapegoating, as if being associated with me would mar their own reputations. I'd heard them talk, low murmurs blending with the rustling leaves outside. Christine worked tirelessly, her fervor unyielding as she pored over every piece of evidence she could find regarding Mr. Thompson's fraudulent activities. Her commitment fueled my own determination. The way she navigated documents and legal jargon felt like watching a master artist work. She unearthed a hidden history. Thompson had been running a larger scam that implicated several other agents around town, each one complicit in his schemes, all benefiting from the fallout while I felt my life unraveling around me. Just when I began to feel the shadows of despair fading into the distance, a bombshell dropped that shattered the fragile hope we'd built. "Take a look at this," Christine said, sliding a thick folder across my cluttered table, her voice laced with urgency. I opened it slowly, scanning the pages filled with shocking details about Thompson's network. But the moment I stumbled across the part that confirmed he was in hiding, a frigid wave of dread washed over me. It was worse than I expected. He was protected by a network of corrupt bankers and real estate agents. Their web stretched out like a sinister net tautly drawn, ensuring he remained untouched while I flailed in this chaos. Every name scrawled on the pages echoed in the back of my mind like a taunting lullaby, a cruel reminder of how deep this corruption ran. Just when I thought the fight was worthless and my spirit was ready to crumble, Christine's eyes sparked with determination, and she uncovered a lead that sent adrenaline pumping through my veins. "I think we've pinpointed Thompson's likely whereabouts," she declared, her grin bright enough to almost blot out the despair of our situation. This was our lifeline. If we could track him down, it could open doors to finally recoup our losses, possibly gaining the evidence we desperately needed. My pulse quickened at the mere thought of confronting him, the man who had orchestrated the quiet storm that had wrecked everything I held dear. As the sky turned to deep indigo that night, filled with glittering stars that felt entirely out of reach, I couldn't shake the tumultuous thoughts swirling in my mind. The more I considered the extent of his deception, the countless families he had duped, the rage I felt simmering beneath the surface roared to life, begging for justice. It wasn't just my bruised reputation at stake. It was the community that had once rallied around me that was now crumbling under the weight of Thompson's betrayal. That weight pressed down on my shoulders, a constant reminder that I could not let his ruthless machinations win. As I lay awake in the dead of night, pulses of fear tangled with a relentless urge to take action. I envisioned Christine and myself storming into whatever lair Thompson had found refuge in, not just as two shattered souls looking for justice, but as warriors ready to shatter the facade he hid behind. Each potential confrontation played out in my mind to knock on his door, demand answers, watch as his shock morphed into fear. This singular moment enveloped my thoughts, morphing into a myriad of unrelenting questions about how he could betray so many while living in luxury. In the coming days, as whispers turned into warnings from locals about what would happen if I dared to confront him, Christine and I prepared ourselves for the worst. She meticulously crafted strategies while I buried my anxieties deep beneath a layer of resolve. It felt like setting up for a showdown between good and evil, as dawn finally broke on the day we would act. Was it foolhardy to think we could take down a man with his dark connections? Or was it the only way to regain my life? This battle had become personal, and despite the intimidation tactics looming over me, a flicker of hope ignited within my heart. Finally, the time had come. My resolve would hinge not only on our encounter with Thompson, but on the strength I managed to channel through the wreckage of my life. With Christine beside me, I felt like an unyielding force, ready to break through the barriers erected by those who had exploited others and gotten away with it far too long. The path ahead was fraught with danger, but somehow it felt inevitable. This was not just about me anymore, it was about justice for everyone he had wronged. It was time to rise as the tides shifted, preparing ourselves for the reckoning that was only just beginning. What would it take to finally unveil the truth? What dangers awaited us in this next chapter of the saga, where the shadows threatened to consume us all? The sun dipped low in the sky, casting a warm orange hue across the lavish hotel parking lot where I stood, trembling with anticipation. Christine was already inside, her presence a flurry of determination and grit, while I lingered outside like a reluctant spectator in a twisted play. We had orchestrated this moment meticulously. Every detail was carefully crafted to expose Thompson's schemes under bright lights. And yet, here I was, crippled by emotions ranging from rage to fear, as the shadows danced on the pavement. The scent of fresh blooms from the hotel's landscaping mixed with the acrid smell of my own trepidation. As the minutes crawled, I stole glances around the opulent building that felt like a fortress designed to protect those who lived outside the law. Thompson's arrogance was palpable in the air, and I imagined him swaggering through the lobby, blissfully unaware that his world was about to shatter. Christine's plan was brilliant. She would charm him pretending to be an unsuspecting buyer, eager to hear about dubious insurance, options precisely what he needed, to reveal the depths of his deception. The thought sent shivers down my spine. Finally, my phone buzzed. Christine was ready for him. I crept closer to the entrance, the echo of my heartbeat threatening to drown out everything else. As I positioned myself behind a column, I caught a glimpse of her playful demeanor as she approached Thompson, casting a veil of innocence over the facade she wore. My heart pounded louder at the sight. She was the perfect bait for the trap, fully aware of the stakes. I leaned in closer, the tension radiating off of me like heat from scorching pavement as the drama unfolded. Inside, I heard the sound of Christine's laughter. She had him hooked. "I've heard so much about the amazing deals you offer. What's your secret?" she purred, her voice smooth yet sharp enough to cut through any deception. I stood frozen as I caught sight of Thompson's smug grin, his eyes narrowing as he leaned in closer, his voice lowering conspiratorially. This was the moment, the reckoning we had been waiting for. He was slowly weaving the story he thought would charm her into his web of lies, proudly extolling the virtues of his non-existent insurance, confident that he was untouchable. "You thought you could escape the consequences, didn't you, Mr. Thompson?" Christine's voice sliced through the air like a weapon. I watched in horror and exhilaration as his demeanor shifted, confusion clouding his eyes. The panic was a palpable entity that hung between us, vibrating with the electricity of a coming storm. Christine stepped back, revealing her hidden camera, and watched as the walls of his illusion crumbled. The laughter faded from his voice, replaced with a venomous sneer. Before he could mount a defense, the police officers, whom we had notified earlier, burst through the doors, their uniforms stark against the plush decor. I gasped, as Thompson's face twisted in disbelief, the kind of disbelief that is born from being upturned and unmasked in the blinding light of truth. Within moments, he was handcuffed, his sophisticated veneers stripped away like a house of cards. I stepped forward just as he turned to face me, and the smugness that had once danced in his eyes vanished. "You ruined me," he shouted, a wild desperation creeping into his tone. "No, Mr. Thompson, you ruined yourself. You thought you could lie, cheat, and evade justice. But here we are, and justice isn't just an idea anymore, it's staring you in the face," I responded, feeling a wave of satisfaction wash over me. As he was escorted out, my heart swelled with a bittersweet sense of justice. I had fought tooth and nail against the ocean of despair that had threatened to consume me, and now the tide was turning. In the aftermath, the hotel seemed to exhale with relief, reverberating with the promises of truth being restored. I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Christine, her smile radiant, filled with the triumph of hard-fought victory. While we still faced a long, arduous path to recovery repairing our home, rebuilding relationships, reclaiming my name, I could finally see the glimmers of hope on the horizon. With Thompson behind bars, I could begin to face the living wreckage of what he'd left behind. But this time, I wouldn't face it alone. Just like Christine had stood by me, I would work to ensure that no one else would fall into the same trap. I would become the warrior of truth for those shaken by deceit. My heart was raw, but resolute. I was ready to mend the pieces of my shattered life with the knowledge that, at long last, I had regained the power to steer my own ship back into calmer waters.